The Unraveling, a story of family betrayal and redemption. This is a tangled web of family drama, betrayal, and ultimately, a revenge that felt sweeter than it probably should have. I'm Emily, 29 years old, and this is the story of how my perfect family facade crumbled like ancient parchment, and how I rebuilt my life from the ashes, brick by satisfying brick. Growing up, we were the epitome of the perfect family. At least that's what everyone in our affluent suburban neighborhood believed. My parents, Richard and Alina Ashford, were pillars of the community, the kind of people whose names appeared in the society pages of the local newspaper with enviable regularity. Dad ran Ashford and Associates, a successful real estate firm that had dominated the market for over 2 decades, specializing in luxury properties and commercial developments. His face smiled from billboards across 3 counties, his signature beneath the company's slogan, "Building dreams, creating legacies." Mom was a philanthropist in the truest social sense, always impeccably dressed in designer labels, always involved in some charity gala or fundraising event, always photographed with a champagne flute in one hand and a cause in the other. The annual Ashford Foundation Gala was the event of the season, drawing celebrities, politicians, and business moguls from across the state. Alina Ashford knew everyone who mattered, and she made sure everyone knew it. We lived in a sprawling colonial revival house in Meadowbrook Estates, the most exclusive gated community in the area. 6 bedrooms, 8 bathrooms, a pool house, tennis courts, and a 3-car garage housing Dad's Mercedes, Mom's BMW, and the Porsche that sat mostly unused except for special occasions. Our family photos lined the grand staircase, professional portraits taken annually, each one perfectly composed, perfectly lit, perfectly fake. My younger brother, Daniel, was 3 years my junior and the undisputed golden child. Handsome in that effortless way that some people are blessed with, sandy blonde hair that always fell just right, blue eyes that sparkled with mischief, a smile that could charm anyone from grandmothers to business partners. He was captain of the varsity lacrosse team, maintained a respectable B+ average without really trying, and had a rotating cast of girlfriends who all seemed to think he hung the moon. Daniel was destined for greatness, or so everyone constantly reminded me. And me, I was Emily, the dutiful daughter, the good student, the responsible one. I was the child who color-coded her notes, who never missed curfew, who volunteered at the local library on weekends. I wore my straight-A report cards like armor, hoping they would finally be enough to earn the approval that always seemed just out of reach. My accolades were acknowledged with distant nods and remarks like, "Well, that's what we expect," while Daniel's mediocre achievements were celebrated with elaborate dinners and expensive gifts. But behind the closed doors of our picture-perfect colonial, behind the carefully maintained facade of family unity, things were fundamentally different. The dysfunction ran deep, like rot in the foundation that no one wanted to acknowledge. Dad was a workaholic of the most extreme variety, often disappearing to his home office at 6 a.m. and not emerging until past midnight. Weekends were consumed by networking events and client meetings that always seemed more important than family time. When he was present, he was emotionally distant, his mind clearly elsewhere, scrolling through his phone during dinners or grunting monosyllabic responses to questions. But worse than his absence were his explosive outbursts, sudden eruptions of rage over minor infractions, like someone moving papers on his desk or interrupting him during a phone call. I learned early to make myself small and quiet around him, to anticipate his moods and adjust accordingly. Mom was a different kind of difficult. Where Dad was overtly harsh, Mom dealt in subtleties, the master of passive aggression and backhanded compliments. "That dress is lovely, dear, though perhaps something more. Slimming would be better for your figure." Or, "Your presentation was very thorough, Emily, even if it was a bit intense. You don't want to come across as too aggressive, darling. Men don't find that attractive." She had a gift for making me feel inadequate without ever directly criticizing me, undermining my confidence with surgical precision. She constantly compared me to other daughters, prettier ones, more social ones who were already engaged to suitable men from suitable families. What was worse was how she pitted Daniel and me against each other, creating a competitive dynamic that poisoned our sibling relationship from the start. She would praise Daniel's social skills while lamenting my bookishness, or comment on how Daniel knew how to work a room, while I was too serious. Every accomplishment I achieved was diminished by some comparison to what Daniel might do, or what the neighbors' children had already done. And Daniel, he absorbed every ounce of their indulgence and became exactly what you'd expect, spoiled, entitled, and utterly convinced of his own importance. He used his considerable charm like a weapon, getting away with broken curfews, mediocre grades, and minor legal infractions, a DUI at 19 that Dad made disappear with a phone call and a donation. He treated me with casual cruelty, the kind that might seem like sibling teasing to an outsider but was calculated to wound. He would borrow my belongings without asking, spread rumors about me to my few friends, and take credit for my ideas at family dinners. When I confronted him, he would flash that golden boy smile and say I was being too sensitive or couldn't take a joke. Despite it all, or perhaps because of it, I craved their approval with an intensity that embarrassed me even then. I was like a plant desperately reaching toward a sun that kept moving away, never quite able to photosynthesize enough love to truly thrive. I threw myself into academics, into extracurricular activities, into being the perfect daughter, convinced that if I just achieved enough, excelled enough, proved myself enough, they would finally see me. I was valedictorian of my high school, graduated summa cum laude from a prestigious university with a degree in business management, earned my MBA with honors. I did internships at top firms, networked obsessively, developed expertise in commercial real estate and corporate finance. Every choice was calculated to prepare me for what I believed was my destiny, joining Ashford and Associates and finally earning my place in the family. I imagined it so clearly, walking into that glass-fronted office building with my name added to the sign, working alongside Dad, proving my worth, finally being seen as valuable. I studied his business model, learned everything about the industry, prepared myself to be not just an asset but an indispensable one. The conversation that shattered that dream took place in Dad's home office, 3 weeks after I'd received my MBA. I'd requested the meeting formally, prepared a portfolio showcasing my qualifications and ideas for expanding the business into sustainable development, a growing market segment. I wore my best interview suit, carried my leather portfolio, and entered his office with my heart hammering against my ribs. Dad barely looked up from his computer screen. "Make it quick, Emily. I have a conference call in 20 minutes. I launched into my presentation, outlining my vision for the company, the market research I'd conducted, the potential ROI of my proposals. I'd practiced this pitch dozens of times, polished it until it shone. When I finished, he leaned back in his leather chair and regarded me with something that might have been pity but looked more like dismissal. "Emily, that's very ambitious, but there isn't a place for you in the firm." The words hit me like a physical blow. "What? But I've spent years preparing." "It's a man's world, sweetheart," he interrupted, using a patronizing tone I'd heard him employ with difficult clients. "Real estate, especially commercial real estate, requires a certain assertiveness, toughness. Clients want to deal with men. That's just the reality of the industry." "But Dad, I can." "You'd be better off finding a nice husband and settling down," he continued, as if I hadn't spoken. "Focus on starting a family. That's where women really excel anyway. I'll tell you what." He pulled out his checkbook, scrawling something quickly. "Here's $50,000. Consider it a graduation gift. Start a hobby. Maybe open a boutique or something. Isn't that what young women do these days?" He tore off the check and held it out to me, as if this was generous. As if he was doing me a favor. As if he hadn't just crushed every dream I'd carefully constructed over the past decade. I took the check with numb fingers, too shocked to formulate a response. My throat was tight with unshed tears, but I refused to cry in front of him. I wouldn't give him the satisfaction. I tried to talk to Mom about it that evening, finding her in her sitting room, reviewing invitations for an upcoming charity luncheon. She didn't even look up from her gilt-edged cards. "Your father knows best, dear," she said dismissively. "Besides, having a career is so exhausting. Wouldn't you rather find a nice young man from a good family? The Peterson boy is single, and his father owns that pharmaceutical company. Or what about the Williams heir? I could arrange an introduction at the club. I don't want an introduction, Mom. I want to work. I want to use my degree. She finally looked up, her expression one of mild irritation. Don't be difficult, Emily. Your father has spoken. And honestly, why would you want to work in that stressful environment anyway? Look at what it's done to your father's blood pressure. I left the room before she could see my tears. I passed Daniel in the hallway. He was heading out to meet friends, his BMW keys jingling in his hand, wearing designer clothes that Dad had purchased for him without question. Heard about your little chat with Dad, he said with that infuriating smirk. Don't worry, sis. When I take over the company, maybe I'll hire you as my secretary. He laughed at his own joke and brushed past me, leaving me standing alone in the hallway of the house I'd grown up in, feeling more isolated than I'd ever felt in my life. I was crushed, truly and completely devastated. It felt like everything I had worked for, every sacrifice I'd made, every dream I'd deferred had been for absolutely nothing. The career path I'd envisioned, the future I'd built in my mind, all of it evaporated in a single conversation. But I had $50,000 and wounded pride, which proved to be a potent combination. I moved out of my parents' house within a month, taking only what was truly mine and leaving behind the bedroom that had never really felt like it belonged to me anyway. I found a modest one-bedroom apartment across town, nothing like the luxury I'd grown up with, but it was mine. Every piece of second-hand furniture, every dish from the thrift store, every decision about wall paint and curtains, all mine. I took that money, my hobby fund as Dad had called it, and started an online business selling handmade jewelry. It wasn't my dream, not even close. But I needed something, some purpose, some way to feel like I was building toward something rather than simply existing in the rubble of my demolished expectations. I taught myself metalworking from YouTube videos, practiced wire wrapping until my fingers were raw, experimented with resin and gemstones and vintage findings. My first pieces were honestly terrible, clunky, amateur, the kind of thing you'd find at a middle school craft fair. But I persisted. I created an Etsy shop, photographed my work against white backgrounds, wrote descriptions that tried to capture the story behind each piece. The first sale was a simple silver bracelet with a small turquoise stone. Someone in Oregon paid $35 for something I'd made with my own hands. I cried when I packaged it up, sealing it with more care than it probably warranted, including a handwritten thank you note. Slowly, painfully slowly, the business grew. I learned about SEO and social media marketing, about wholesale versus retail, about customer service and inventory management. I poured my heart into it. The same intensity I'd once directed toward earning my family's approval now channeled into something that was wholly, completely mine. I made friends, real friends, not the superficial connections from my parents' social circle. Artists and small business owners, people who understood the terror and exhilaration of building something from nothing. We met at coffee shops and craft markets, shared advice and encouragement, celebrated each other's successes without jealousy or competition. For the first time in my life, I was living authentically. I was making my own decisions, setting my own standards, defining my own version of success. My apartment was small but filled with plants and art that I actually liked. My clothes came from thrift stores but reflected my actual taste rather than what was appropriate. My days were mine to structure. My goals were mine to set. After a few years, my business was doing well, not spectacularly, but sustainably. I had a loyal customer base, consistent monthly revenue, and genuine pride in what I was creating. I had a great group of friends who knew me as Emily the artist, not Emily the disappointing daughter. I was finally starting to feel like I was living my own life, free from my family's suffocating expectations. I maintained minimal contact with my parents, obligatory appearances at major holidays, stilted phone calls on birthdays. They showed no interest in my business or my life. Mom would ask when I was planning to settle down properly, and Dad would grunt something about playing at entrepreneur. Daniel was being groomed to take over the firm, attending meetings and learning the business, living in a luxury condo that Dad had purchased for him. I was content, or at least I was learning to be. The wound of their rejection had scabbed over if not fully healed. I'd built a life without them. And then everything exploded. The call came at 2:37 a.m. on a Wednesday. I know because I stared at my phone screen for a full 30 seconds before answering, my heart racing, because nothing good ever comes from a call at that hour. "Emily," Daniel's voice was ragged, panicked in a way I'd never heard before. The golden boy never panicked. "Emily, I need your help, please, I don't know what to do." "Daniel, what's wrong? Are you hurt?" "I'm at the office, Dad's office. Emily, I found, there are documents, financial records, I think Dad's been," his voice cracked. "I think he's been stealing, from the company, from clients. Emily, this is bad, this is really, really bad." I was already out of bed, pulling on clothes. "Stay there, don't touch anything else, I'm coming." The drive to Ashford and Associates took 20 minutes that felt like hours. The building was dark except for the lights in Dad's corner office on the top floor. I found Daniel there, surrounded by paper, file folders, spreadsheets, bank statements, scattered across the massive mahogany desk and floor like evidence of an explosion. He looked up when I entered, and I was shocked by his appearance. His hair was disheveled, his eyes red-rimmed, his usual confident posture collapsed into something small and frightened. This wasn't the cocky brother I'd grown up with. This was someone who just discovered that everything he believed in was built on lies. "Show me," I said. We spent the next 4 hours going through everything he'd found. Daniel had been doing routine preparation for taking over the company, reviewing accounts and client files, when he'd noticed discrepancies. Following the thread had led him to a hidden folder in Dad's private file cabinet, the kind of obvious secret that you only get away with when no one is looking because they trust you completely. The scope of it was staggering. For at least 15 years, Dad had been systematically siphoning money from the firm. He'd created shell corporations with innocuous names, Summit Holdings, Cascade Investments, Riverstone Properties. He'd been inflating property values, skimming from client accounts, redirecting commissions, hiding assets in offshore accounts in the Cayman Islands and Switzerland. The documentation was meticulous, which somehow made it worse. This wasn't impulsive crime, but calculated, long-term fraud. We're talking millions of dollars, maybe tens of millions. "He's been planning to retire," Daniel said, his voice hollow. "He announced it last month, remember? The big party at the country club, everyone toasting his legacy." I remembered. I hadn't attended. "He's leaving me to take over, but Emily, if anyone audits these books, if the IRS looks closely, if even one client starts asking questions." He looked at me with genuine terror. "I'll go to prison. I'll be the one holding the bag when it all comes out." Now, I'm not going to lie. Part of me, a not insignificant part, wanted to see him squirm. Wanted to watch the golden child finally face consequences for something, even if it wasn't technically his crime. He had always been so smug, so self-assured, so certain of his place in the world. He'd mocked my ambitions, dismissed my achievements, treated me like an inconvenient obstacle rather than a sister. But despite everything, despite all the years of resentment and hurt, I still had a shred of loyalty to my family. And more than that, I could see that Daniel was genuinely terrified. He wasn't the privileged son in that moment. He was a 26-year-old kid who just discovered his father was a criminal and that he might pay the price. And I knew, with sickening certainty, that if Dad's crimes were exposed, it would destroy everything. Mom's social standing, the family name, the business that bore our name, Daniel's future, everything would crumble. So, against my better judgment, I agreed to help. "We need a plan," I said, "and we need a professional." The next few weeks were a blur of late nights and complicated forensic accounting. I used my own money, the savings I'd carefully accumulated from my jewelry business, to hire Marcus Webb, a forensic accountant recommended by one of my artist friends whose ex-husband had tried to hide assets during their divorce. Marcus was expensive, discreet, and frighteningly good at his job. He set up shop in my small apartment, turning my dining table into a command center covered with laptops, documents, and multiple monitors. Daniel and I brought him everything we could find, sneaking documents out of the office after hours, photographing files, downloading records. Marcus worked with the intensity of someone solving a complex puzzle, which I suppose he was. He traced the shell corporations, mapped the money movements, identified the offshore accounts. The picture that emerged was even worse than we'd initially thought. "Your father is good," Marcus said one evening, leaning back from his computer screen and rubbing his eyes. "I mean, this is sophisticated stuff. Multiple layers of corporations, legitimate-looking transactions mixed with fraudulent ones, careful timing of transfers. If he'd retired as planned, it might have been years before anyone noticed." "Can we fix it?" Daniel asked desperately. "Can we move the money back without anyone noticing?" Marcus shook his head. "Not without leaving a trail. And honestly, you shouldn't. This isn't a mistake or an oversight. This is systematic fraud. Someone needs to answer for this." But we weren't ready to accept that. We spent another week trying to figure out how to quietly unwind Dad's crimes, how to return money without exposing the theft, how to protect the family name while fixing the damage. That's when I found it. I was going through Dad's personal files, the ones from his home office, not the work documents, looking for account numbers or passwords. It was late, nearly midnight, and Daniel had gone home hours ago. I was exhausted, my eyes burning from staring at numbers and text, my back aching from hunching over documents. The folder was labeled Personal Insurance Papers, the kind of boring designation that makes you almost skip it entirely. But something made me open it anyway. Inside was a thick envelope, sealed, with a note in Dad's handwriting paperclip to the front. "For Richard Jr., to be opened on my death." Richard Jr., that was Daniel's full name. I shouldn't have opened it. I knew I shouldn't, but my hands were already breaking the seal, pulling out the pages inside. The document was from a private investigation firm, dated 26 years ago. There were photos, surveillance photos of Mom with a man I recognized from old family albums as Dad's best friend from college, Marcus Holloway. Uncle Mark, as we'd called him when we were kids, before he'd moved away and drifted out of our lives. The photos were explicit, undeniable. Mom and Marcus entering a hotel together, kissing in a parking garage. The timestamps covered several months. But it was the next document that made my blood run cold. A paternity test result. The test confirmed that Richard Ashford was not the biological father of Daniel Richard Ashford. There were more pages, legal documents, an agreement signed by Mom and Marcus Holloway. In exchange for leaving town and never contacting the family again, Marcus received $500,000 and an ironclad non-disclosure agreement. He'd moved to Australia, the documents noted. He'd never tried to claim his son. Dad had known. He'd known from before Daniel was even born. The private investigators' report detailed how Dad had suspected the affair, had hired surveillance, had confronted Mom with the evidence when she was 4 months pregnant. And then he'd made a decision. He would raise Daniel as his own, the affair would be buried, and the family's reputation would remain intact. But he'd kept all the evidence, as insurance, the notes suggested, as leverage. I sat in that office, holding proof that my entire family was even more of a lie than I'd imagined, and felt something inside me fundamentally break. Daniel wasn't my biological brother. The golden child, the heir to everything, the one who'd been chosen over me again and again. He wasn't even Dad's son. And Mom, with all her moral superiority and social consciousness, had been lying to everyone for nearly 3 decades. They'd all known. Dad had known and used it as power over Mom. Mom had known and lived with the fear of exposure. And they'd kept it from Daniel, let him believe in a legacy that wasn't even his. What had I been fighting for all these years? What approval had I been seeking from a father who wasn't even preferring his actual son over me, but rather maintaining an elaborate charade? What family had I been trying to fit into? I drove home in a daze as dawn was breaking, the envelope of documents on my passenger seat like a bomb waiting to detonate. I didn't sleep. I sat on my couch, staring at nothing, as everything I thought I knew about my family rearranged itself into new, uglier patterns. By noon, I'd made my decision. I called Daniel and asked him to come to my apartment. When he arrived, I handed him the envelope without preamble. "I found this in Dad's office. You need to see it." I watched his face as he read, saw the confusion turn to shock, turn to devastation. He read it twice, then looked up at me with eyes that were drowning. "This can't be real. Emily, this has to be some kind of mistake." "It's not," I said quietly. "Look at the dates. Look at the signatures. Marcus, your father is right in the photos, Daniel, and Dad knew. He's known your entire life." He collapsed onto my couch, the papers falling from his hands. Everything is a lie." "Yes," I agreed, "everything." We sat in silence for a long time. Then Daniel asked, "What are we going to do?" That's when I told him my plan. The rage had been building in me slowly, like a pressure cooker reaching critical temperature. For years, I'd tried to be the dutiful daughter, the loyal family member. I'd swallowed their criticisms, their dismissals, their casual cruelty. I'd accepted being overlooked, undervalued, discarded. I'd even tried to save them from the consequences of their own crimes. But I was done. "We're going to expose them," I said. "All of it. The fraud, the affair, the lies, everything." Daniel stared at me. "Emily, that will destroy." "They destroyed me first," I interrupted. "They destroyed you too, they just did it more slowly. Don't you see, Daniel? We've been living in their constructed reality our entire lives. We've been playing roles in their performance. I'm done performing." But the business, the family name, was built on lies and theft. It deserves to fall. I spent the next 2 weeks gathering everything, organizing it meticulously. Marcus, the accountant, thought I was crazy, but helped me put together a comprehensive package of evidence. I had documentation of Dad's financial crimes, the offshore accounts, the shell corporations, the inflated appraisals, the skimmed commissions. I had proof of Mom's affair and the paternity secret. I had photos, bank statements, legal documents, sworn statements. I contacted a journalist at the city's major newspaper, a woman named Jennifer Torres who'd built a reputation for investigative reporting on white-collar crime. I gave her everything, carefully curated and explained, with one condition. She had to verify it all independently before publishing. It took her 3 weeks. She came back with follow-up questions, which I answered. She tracked down Marcus Holloway in Australia, who, after 30 years of silence and apparently tired of hiding, confirmed everything. She contacted the IRS, who began their own investigation. She interviewed former employees of Ashford and Associates who'd noticed irregularities but been too intimidated to speak up. The first article ran on a Sunday morning, front page above the fold. "Prominent real estate developer under investigation for decades of fraud." The second article came 2 days later. "The secret behind the perfect family, Ashford Foundation built on lies." The destruction was immediate and comprehensive, like watching a building collapse in slow motion. Federal agents raided Ashford and Associates on a Tuesday morning, walking out with boxes of evidence and hard drives. Dad was arrested at home the following day, charged with multiple counts of wire fraud, embezzlement, money laundering, and tax evasion. The bail was set at $5 million. He made it barely by liquidating assets. The business collapsed within a week. Clients fled, demanding audits of their transactions. Several filed lawsuits. The company's accounts were frozen during the investigation. The building was sold to cover legal fees. The Ashford name, once prestigious, became synonymous with scandal. Mom's carefully constructed social world evaporated overnight. Her charity board asked for her resignation. The country club membership was quietly revoked. Friends stopped returning her calls. The society pages that had once celebrated her now dissected her failures, her affair, her deception, the irony of a philanthropist living off stolen money. Daniel was left to pick up the pieces of both the shattered business and his own shattered identity. He wasn't charged with any crimes. The evidence clearly showed he'd been unaware of Dad's activities. but he was left with the psychological burden of discovering that his entire life had been predicated on lies. He wasn't Richard Ashford's son and heir. He was the product of an affair, a secret that had been kept from him, a pretender who'd never even known he was pretending. The family home was seized to pay restitution to Dad's victims. Mom moved into a small condo downtown, a shocking downgrade from the estate she'd presided over. Dad's trial was set for the following year, his lawyers already trying to negotiate a plea deal. And me, I watched it all unfold from my small apartment with a sense of grim satisfaction that probably didn't speak well of my character. It wasn't pretty, seeing my family's destruction play out in news articles and legal proceedings. It wasn't entirely satisfying either. Revenge rarely is. But it was necessary. They'd built their empire on lies and exploitation, and I'd been complicit in maintaining it through my silence. By exposing them, I'd taken back some measure of control over my own narrative. I wasn't the disappointing daughter anymore. I wasn't the overlooked sibling, the one who wasn't good enough for the family business. I was the whistleblower, the truth-teller, the one who'd refused to let injustice stand even when it was perpetrated by my own blood. After the dust settled, and it took months for the initial chaos to calm into the duller rhythm of legal proceedings, I decided to use my newfound freedom to pursue my real passion: sustainable fashion. The jewelry business had taught me about handcraft, about building a brand, about connecting with customers who cared about more than just the end product. But I'd always been interested in clothing, in textile design, in the intersection of fashion and environmental responsibility. I sold my jewelry business to one of my former employees, a talented designer who'd been learning the craft alongside me. She gave me a fair price, and I used that money, combined with what remained of my savings, to start a new venture: a clothing line focused on ethical production and eco-friendly materials. I called it Revenant, something that returns after a long absence, something reborn. I started small, working with local textile artists, using organic cotton and recycled fabrics, partnering with ethical manufacturers. I designed pieces that were meant to last, to be worn and loved and repaired rather than discarded. Each garment came with information about its production, where the fabric was sourced, who made it, what the true cost was. It was challenging in entirely new ways. The fashion industry is notoriously difficult to break into, and sustainable fashion even more so. But I was older now, more confident, and I'd already survived the worst thing I could imagine: the complete dissolution of my family. Product returns and difficult suppliers seemed manageable by comparison. I also started therapy. Dr. Sarah Chen specialized in family trauma and complex PTSD, and she helped me understand that what I'd experienced wasn't just disappointment or typical family dysfunction. It was emotional abuse and manipulation that had shaped my entire identity. "You were raised in an environment where love was conditional," she explained during one of our early sessions, "where your worth was determined by external validation that was deliberately withheld. That creates lasting patterns of believing you're never enough." The work was hard, harder than building a business, harder than exposing my family's crimes. I had to confront the ways I'd internalized their criticisms, how I'd learned to minimize my own needs, how I'd become addicted to seeking approval from people incapable of truly giving it. But slowly, painfully slowly, I began to heal. I built healthier relationships with friends, started dating again, disastrously at first, then gradually better, learned to set boundaries, practiced self-compassion. Revenant grew steadily. I got write-ups in sustainable fashion blogs, then in mainstream fashion magazines. A few small boutiques started carrying my designs. I hired employees, people who shared my values and vision. I moved into a larger apartment, then into a small house with a yard where I could garden. I was building a life that was wholly, completely mine. 3 years after the initial exposure, on an ordinary Thursday afternoon, I received a letter. Not an email, an actual letter, handwritten on simple notebook paper, in an envelope with a postmark from Millbrook, a small town about 4 hours north. The return address said D. Holloway. I stared at it for a long time before opening it. Dear Emily asterisk, I don't know if you'll read this. I'm not sure I deserve for you to read this. But I'm writing it anyway because my therapist says I need to make amends, and you're the person I wronged most. I'm living in Millbrook now, working as a carpenter. It's good work, honest, simple, the kind where you can see the results of your labor. I build cabinets, restore old furniture, help people repair their homes. It's nothing like the life I thought I'd have, but it's mine. I want to apologize for the way I treated you growing up. I was cruel and dismissive, and I justified it because that's how our parents treated you, so it seemed normal. But it wasn't normal. It was abuse, and I participated in it. I've spent a lot of time in therapy trying to understand why. The easy answer is that I was just a spoiled brat, but it's more complicated than that. I think part of me always knew on some level that something was wrong, that I didn't quite fit, that the pedestal they put me on was unstable. And seeing you, so smart, so capable, so genuinely talented, made me deeply insecure. So I tore you down to make myself feel more secure in a position that was never really mine. When you exposed everything, I was angry at first. I felt betrayed. But then I realized you didn't betray me. You freed me. I was living a lie, preparing to inherit a criminal empire, believing in a legacy that was built on fraud and deception. You saved me from that, even though it meant destroying the only identity I'd ever had. I've reached out to Marcus, to my biological father. We've been talking on the phone, carefully, awkwardly. He has a family in Australia, half-siblings I've never met. He wants me to visit. I think I might. I don't know if you'll ever want to see me or talk to me. I understand if you don't. But if you're willing, I'd like to try to build something honest between us. Not the toxic sibling relationship we had before, but something real. There's a coffee shop on Main Street in Millbrook called the Rusty Kettle. I'm there most Saturday mornings around 10 a.m., working on furniture designs and drinking too much coffee. If you ever want to meet, I'll be there. I'm sorry for everything, and thank you for telling the truth, even when it hurt all of us. Daniel asterisk. I read the letter 3 times, crying through the second and third readings. This was the brother I'd never known, vulnerable, honest, self-aware. Not the golden child or the entitled heir, but a human being who'd been just as damaged by our parents' dysfunction as I had been. I carried that letter with me for 2 weeks, reading and rereading it, trying to decide what to do. I discussed it with Dr. Chen, who warned me about the risks of re-engaging with family members who'd hurt me, but also acknowledged that people can change, and that genuine amends deserve consideration. Finally, on a Saturday morning in early October, I drove to Millbrook. The town was exactly what you'd expect. A picturesque small community with a main street lined with local businesses, old trees turning brilliant shades of orange and red, people who waved at each other from across the street. The Rusty Kettle was a cozy cafe with mismatched furniture and local art on the walls, the kind of place that felt lived in and genuine. I spotted Daniel immediately. He was sitting at a corner table, hunched over a sketchbook, a half-empty coffee mug beside him. He looked different. His hair was longer, slightly unkempt, and he'd grown a beard. He wore a flannel shirt and jeans splattered with sawdust. The expensive watch Dad had given him for his 21st birthday was gone, replaced by a simple digital one that looked practical rather than showy. He looked up as I approached, and the expression that crossed his face was complex. Hope, fear, shame, longing, all mixed together. "Emily," he said quietly, standing up awkwardly. "You came. I wasn't sure you would." "I wasn't sure I would either," I admitted, sliding into the chair across from him. We ordered coffee from a cheerful waitress who clearly knew Daniel, calling him by name and asking about a rocking chair he was building for her grandmother. It gave me a moment to compose myself, to figure out what I wanted to say. When she left, we sat in silence for a moment. Then Daniel spoke. "I've started from the beginning," he said. "New name, I go by Daniel Holloway now. New town, new profession. I'm learning who I am without all the pretense and expectations." "How's that going?" I asked. He laughed, but it wasn't his old mocking laugh. This was self-deprecating, genuine. It's terrifying and liberating in equal measure. I'm not very good at carpentry yet, but I'm getting better. And I'm learning that being good at something because you actually worked for it feels different than being praised for things you didn't earn. You said you've been talking to Marcus. His face softened. Yeah, he's not what I expected. He's quiet, thoughtful. He builds boats in his spare time. He's been married for 20 years to a woman named Catherine, and they have 2 daughters, my half-sisters, teenagers now. He never tried to contact me because he'd signed the agreement, but when Jennifer Torres tracked him down for the article, something broke in him. He told her everything, and then he wrote to me. Are you angry at him? Daniel considered this. I was, but honestly, he's the least culpable person in all of this. He had an affair, yes, but then he honored his agreement and stayed away, even though it meant never knowing his son. Mom and Dad, he stopped, corrected himself. Mom and Richard, they're the ones who built the lies and forced everyone else to live in them. Have you talked to them? Mom calls sometimes. I mostly don't answer. She wants me to understand her side, to forgive her, to tell her it's all going to be okay. But it's not okay, and I can't give her absolution. He traced a pattern on the table with his finger. Richard's in prison now. Plea deal, 12 years for fraud and embezzlement. He wrote me one letter from there. It was just excuses and justifications, blaming everyone but himself. I didn't respond. Our coffee arrived, and we both took grateful sips, letting the warmth and caffeine ease the tension. Emily, I want you to know, Daniel continued, I've been working with a therapist on understanding my role in the family dynamics. And I'm realizing that even though I was a victim of their manipulation too, I still made choices. I chose to be cruel to you. I chose to take advantage of my position. I chose to mock your accomplishments and belittle your dreams. None of that was okay, regardless of the broader context. I felt tears prickling at my eyes. I spent so many years blaming myself, I admitted, thinking if I was just better, smarter, more charming, more compliant, then maybe they'd love me. Maybe I'd finally be enough. You were always enough, Daniel said fiercely. They were the ones who were broken, not you. I see that now. You were the strong one. You got out, you built something real, you told the truth even when it cost you everything. It cost you everything too. No, he shook his head. It cost me everything I thought I had, but all of that was an illusion. What you gave me was a chance to build something real, to become someone authentic instead of just playing a role in their performance. We talked for 3 hours, about our childhoods, about specific incidents we'd both experienced but interpreted differently, about the ways Mom had pitted us against each other, how Dad had used competition and scarcity of approval to control us, about the relief and terror of building new lives from scratch. Daniel showed me his sketchbook, designs for furniture, simple and elegant, with notes about joinery and wood grain. He talked about his small workshop, about learning from an older carpenter named Joe who'd taken him on as an apprentice, about the satisfaction of creating something functional and beautiful with his hands. I told him about Revenant, about the challenges and successes of the business, about my vision for scaling it while maintaining ethical standards. I showed him photos on my phone of my latest collection, flowing dresses in organic linen, structured jackets made from recycled textiles, each piece a small rebellion against fast fashion's disposability. You did it, he said, scrolling through the images. You built exactly what you wanted to build. No one gave you permission or access or funding, you just did it anyway. So did you, I pointed out. That rocking chair the waitress mentioned, you're building that from scratch, learning a new skill, creating something that will be used and loved. He smiled, and it was different from any smile I'd seen on his face before, unguarded, genuine, free of performance. Maybe we're both finally becoming who we were supposed to be. Before I left, we exchanged phone numbers and made tentative plans to stay in touch. No promises of immediate closeness or instant reconciliation, just an acknowledgement that we were both willing to try building something honest. Emily, he said as I was getting into my car, I know I don't have the right to ask, but are you happy? After everything, are you okay? I considered the question seriously. Was I happy? My family was shattered. My parents were disgraced. My childhood had been revealed as a carefully constructed lie. I'd lost the approval I'd spent decades seeking, only to discover it was never worth having in the first place. But I had a business I was proud of, friends who valued me for who I actually was, a relationship with myself that was finally honest. And now, tentatively, the possibility of building something real with the brother who'd once been my tormentor, but who was becoming, slowly, an ally. "I'm getting there," I told him. "For the first time in my life, I'm actually getting there." I'm writing this from my home office, in a house I own outright in a neighborhood I chose because I loved the tree-lined streets and the community garden down the block. Revenant has grown beyond what I imagined. We're now in 70 boutiques across the country. We've launched a rental program to reduce waste, and we've partnered with vocational training programs to teach garment-making skills. I'm 34 now, and I've learned that healing isn't linear. Some days I still catch myself seeking validation from people who haven't earned the right to give it. Some nights I still dream about the family dinners where I was invisible, wake up with my chest tight with old anxiety. But those moments are fewer now, and I've learned to be gentle with myself when they occur. Daniel and I talk every few weeks. He visited last month, brought me a beautiful coffee table he'd built from reclaimed barn wood. He's planning to visit Marcus in Australia next year, meet his half-sisters in person, maybe build something with his biological father in that boat workshop. He's dadding a teacher he met at a community art class, someone who knows his whole messy history and loves him anyway. As for my parents, Mom reached out last year, asking if we could have lunch. I declined. Not out of cruelty, but because I've learned that forgiveness doesn't require reconciliation, and moving forward doesn't mean going back. She's attending therapy now, according to Daniel, trying to understand her role in the family's dysfunction. I hope she finds some peace, but I don't need to be part of that journey. Dad will be released from prison in 7 years. I don't know what. If anything, I'll feel when that happens. He's become abstract to me, less a father and more a character in a story about my past, a cautionary tale about the cost of maintaining appearances at the expense of authenticity. I've built a life that's mine, not the life they wanted for me, not the life I thought I was supposed to want. My own life, constructed carefully and deliberately from the ruins of their empire. And here's what I've learned. The opposite of a perfect family isn't a broken one. It's an honest one. It's people who show up as themselves, who own their flaws and mistakes, who do the hard work of building genuine connections instead of maintaining facades. I don't have the perfect family anymore, and I never really did. But I have something better. I have truth. I have authenticity. I have the freedom to define success on my own terms and build relationships based on genuine connection rather than performance. Some people might say I destroyed my family for revenge. They're not entirely wrong. The initial impulse was anger, was hurt, was a desperate need to make them feel some fraction of the pain they'd caused me. But what actually happened was liberation. I liberated myself from the prison of their expectations. I liberated Daniel from a legacy built on lies. I even, in some way, liberated Mom and Dad from the exhausting charade they'd been maintaining for decades. The truth is often painful. Exposure is rarely pretty, but living in a lie is its own kind of death, slow, suffocating, soul-destroying. I chose life. Messy, complicated, authentic life. And I'd make the same choice again. Am I the asshole for exposing my family's dirty secrets and taking back what's mine? Maybe, probably, almost certainly by conventional standards. But I'm also free, and I'm finally truly myself. And that, I've learned, is worth more than any family approval, any inherited legacy, any perfectly maintained facade could ever be.